An exciting evening for the Baltimore Orioles. Welcome into MASN All Access as we are live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube to cover the first round of the MLB Draft. And today's show is brought to you by Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. An exciting night for the Baltimore Orioles franchise, who hold the number 5 overall pick in this draft. We will take you up through that pick and have analysis leading up to it and afterwards. And we'll also be joined by GM Mike Elias in the immediate aftermath to discuss and break down the Orioles selection. I'm joined by Steve Molesky of MASNsports.com, who joins us via Zoom. And Steve, this isn't the number 1 or number 2 pick like we've seen Mike Elias make in 2019 and 2020, but it's still a very important night for Mike Elias and company.
Very important night, Paul. I mean, building the elite talent pipeline is a job that never has a beginning or an end. It's ongoing. And I mean, tonight with the number 5 pick in the draft, the Orioles hope to get a future impact major league player. This is a player who they hope will go immediately into those top 100 lists and just add some real star power to the top of the farm system, which already has a lot of it, with Adley Rutschman, who played today in the futures game and is the number 2 prospect in the sport, the number 1 remaining in the minors. So it's a big night for the Orioles. They'll make just 1 pick tonight, but they have a bunch of picks coming after that when the draft resumes on Monday.
Absolutely, Steve. Speaking of which, let's give you an overview of the draft that will happen over the next 3 days. And it, of course, begins with just the first round and the CBA round 1 tonight. It's 20 rounds in total after last year was just 5. That was the shortest MLB draft in the history of the event. The Orioles, as mentioned, they have the 5th overall pick. That's for the 3rd time in the last 15 years, but their first time since 2009. Mike Elias and company have just that number 5 pick tonight. Their next pick comes tomorrow with number 41 overall. And after tonight, things pick back up tomorrow afternoon with rounds 2 through 10. Then the draft concludes on Tuesday with rounds 11 through 20. And Steve isn't the only one joining me tonight. Also in studio up here in the warehouse at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, we have Brendan Mortensen, who's at the Royal Farms big board. He's going to be breaking down the selections as they happen. And Brendan, from what I understand, a selection has already been made in this draft.
Yeah, Paul, Henry Davis, the catcher out of Louisville, already off the board to the Pittsburgh Pirates at number 1 overall. Many people thought he could have been a possibility for the Orioles at number 5. But heading into the draft, Mike Elias said that this class would be defined by the 4 high school shortstops: Marcelo Mayer, Jordan Lawler, Khalil Watson, and Brady House. Outside of them, there's the Vanderbilt boys, starting pitchers Jack Leiter and Kumar Rocker. And if the Orioles want to implement last year's strategy of going underslot at number 5, they could look to the college ranks in the outfield, either to Sam Houston State's Colton Cowser or to Boston College's Sal Frelick.
Absolutely, and there is still Harry Ford, the high school catcher, who is going to be on the board likely when the Orioles pick at number 5, but a lot of people thought that Henry Davis, the Louisville catcher, could be the guy that the Orioles select if he's off the board. That would raise some questions about Adley Rutschman and that having 2 top-rated catchers in their system, but it seems like the Pirates have made things just a little bit easier for the Orioles, taking away the best catcher in this draft.
Well, at the number 5 pick, you pretty much just want to draft the best player available. At this point, the Baltimore Orioles just need good baseball players. But with the number 1 overall pick, we've already seen things get interesting. Most people thought it was going to be Marcelo Mayer, the high school shortstop. So there's still 4 shortstops left on the board with only 3 picks until the Orioles are up at number 5.
And the number 5 pick has been good to a lot of teams in recent years. Even in the 21st century, we've seen several very good, some potentially Hall of Fame-worthy players taken with that number 5 overall pick. Start with Ryan Braun. Back in 2005, spent his entire career with the Brewers, 6-time All-Star. Just the year after that, in 2007, Matt Wieters, 4-time All-Star, of course, going to the Baltimore Orioles, and then 2008, Buster Posey going to the San Francisco Giants. And yeah, he's been pretty good for them with that number 5 overall pick. So while it has not been a while since we've seen a player of that caliber go with the number 5 pick, it's still very possible that someone could go with that number 5 overall pick, and that is certainly what Mike Elias and company hope for tonight, that they get a player of the ilk of Buster Posey who is able to impact their franchise for years to come. Well, 13 months ago, we were all just sitting at home, waiting, hoping, praying for the return of Major League Baseball. But in the meantime, we had an MLB Draft, the shortest MLB Draft in the history of the event, in fact. And we also had a draft show from Sinclair's newsroom to cover the Orioles' number 2 overall selection. Here's how it went down. Well, tonight begins the shortest MLB Draft in the history of the event, but it's an important one for the Baltimore Orioles, who hold the 2nd overall pick.
They're the only team, Paul, in this draft that has 3 of the first 39.
The commissioner has just announced the Orioles' number 2 overall pick, and it is a shocker. Heston Kjerstad out of the University of Arkansas, an outfielder, a left-handed hitter. Some think he could be the best left-handed hitter in this draft class.
Somebody that's going to hit for average and power and hit in the middle of our order for a long time while playing a quality right field defense.
Bring a left-handed bat and a lineup that has power to all parts of the field, left, right, and center. I also bring a good glove to the outfield, whether it's left or right or wherever they put me. I'll be a solid defender.
Heston Kjerstad was the Orioles' first pick in a draft class that was so small we can fit the whole thing on one graphic. 2020 MLB Draft, of course, had just 5 rounds, and the Orioles came away with 6 selections. Kjerstad, then Jordan Westburg, Hudson Haskin, Anthony Servideo, Kobe Mayo, and Carter Baumler to round out the class. In total, 5 position players, 1 pitcher, 4 were college players, and the final 2 picks were high school prospects. So, Steve, let's bring you back in here to discuss that 2020 draft class, because we know that Heston Kjerstad has gotten off to a slow start in his career dealing with cardiomyopathy, and that has obviously slowed him down. However, they have gotten some good production in the minor leagues from some of their other picks in that 2020 draft class.
Well, Kjerstad and Rutschman have gotten the bulk of the attention, being the top picks in round 1. But, Paul, their second pick in each draft are really making names for themselves. When you go back to Gunnar Henderson 2 years ago, and you can go to Jordan Westburg last year, the number 30 overall pick out of Mississippi State, signed for about $2.3 million. He was tearing it up at Delmarva as a teammate of Gunnar. He got promoted ahead of Gunnar to High A Aberdeen, and after a slow start there, he's really starting to hit. And I've interviewed this kid a couple of times now, Paul. Very mature, very level-headed. He's very team-oriented. The slogans the Orioles have on the farm, he recites them. He's kind of a leader in that. And he's really befriended Gunnar and mentored Gunnar, who's a couple years his junior. But in essence, they're playing for a similar spot, in the major leagues. They both would like to be the future Orioles shortstop. So he's done a great job. Kobe Mayo's off to a hot start, hitting in the Florida Complex League. We know Baumler's hurt and Kjerstad's hurt. Servideo has been out a little bit. Hudson Haskin has had a real strong year. And, Paul, they did well after the draft last year, too. And I know we might have time to talk about that later in some of the signings post 5-round draft last year that are doing well.
Yeah, first baseman J.D. Mundy leads that group. He has been excellent in the minor leagues, really risen up the ranks very quickly. And, of course, a draft that was 5 rounds produced a lot of talent in the undrafted free agent market. Probably not going to be quite the same talent in that undrafted free agent market, but it sounds like there should be some good players left there as well. Thank you, Steve. There are better years than other for that number 5 overall pick. This appears to be a very good year in terms of the quality of talent with that number 5 overall pick, however. And whether the Orioles get their guy or not, they should have a bevy of options at that number 5 pick, as Mike Elias told the media a few days ago.
I think we feel good about it this year. I think there are some years where you'd be looking and you're outside looking in on the talent at 5. I think it's pretty good where we're at. I can't complain about the sort of feel of whether we're getting our full value at the 5 pick. It feels like a good group at 5.
Well, now we have another player off the board. Let's send it back to our Royal Farms big board where Brendan Mortensen is standing by. Brendan, we saw the Pirates go with the catcher from Louisville, Henry Davis, and now we have the top pitcher off the board at the number 2 overall pick.
Yeah, Jack Leiter goes 2nd overall to the Texas Rangers, and if Mike Elias and company wanted a shortstop, they are in luck. The top 3 shortstops in this draft class still available in Marcelo Mayer, Jordan Lawler, and Khalil Watson. A little bit of quick math tells me that only 2 of those guys can go before the Orioles at number 5, so they may be able to get one of those guys to fall and select them at the 5th overall pick.
And the Detroit Tigers are on the clock, which means the Orioles are in the hole, if you will, as they have the Boston Red Sox sitting between them and the time that they are on the clock. And Brendan, Jack Leiter was regarded as the best pitching prospect, in this draft from Vanderbilt. But we know that there's another guy who was on that Vanderbilt staff named Kumar Rocker, who has the potential to be a top 5 selection. But it appeared that Jack Leiter was the favorite among scouts and a lot of GMs.
Yeah, Kumar Rocker might be the most famous player in college baseball, but Jack Leiter was pretty much the consensus best pitching prospect in this draft. Kumar Rocker came into the year, and most people thought he was going to be the guy that you needed at number 1 overall. But he had some issues arise during his junior year, was not as dominant as most people would have expected. He had some issues with velocity, and his command wasn't quite there. So will the Orioles take on that many risks with the number 5 overall pick? It's unclear so far, but I know Mike Elias said when he was talking about pitching that it needs to be the guy this early in the draft. Who knows if that's Kumar Rocker?
Yeah, the Orioles haven't taken a pitcher in the 1st or 2nd round since 2018 when they selected Grayson Rodriguez. That's worked out pretty well so far, but what's the likelihood that Mike Elias snaps that streak and grabs a pitcher with the number 5 overall pick? He answered that question a couple days ago.
We definitely have some candidates for 5 this year that are pitchers, even in our narrowed down group. Doesn't mean that we're going to take them, doesn't mean they're going to be there. Pitching, it's a complicated thing. You know, there's a lot of injury risk along the way. It's not easy to project from the amateur level all the way to the major league level. But you look at the big aces around the big leagues, and they tend to be early 1st round picks, and so you're mindful of that. We want as much pitching as possible. I think that the organization did a great job in the 2017 and 2018 drafts with the 1st round picks, those high school players, but they're not there yet either. You know, we've already had some injury bumps there, and that's just the nature of pitching. But those guys are doing really well, and that's exciting. And we've brought in a lot of really good pitchers via trades. Kyle Bradish, Kevin Smith, those kind of guys are doing well, and we're going to need as many of those guys as possible just because of the nature of pitching and you know, being in this ballpark in this division. We're going to need a lot of good pitching coming internally, so we're mindful of that, but we're not going to force it in the amateur draft if the draft doesn't give it to us. And then, you know, the last couple of years, obviously, we've taken a lot of position players early. I think part of that has been that the Orioles took a lot of pitchers early, several years into that kind of liberated us to take the position players. But also that was just the way those drafts stacked up. I mean, just look at the top of the 2019 draft. It was hitters. The top of the 2020 draft was hitters. And it just so happened that our comp 2nd, 3rd round picks were hitters too. So we'll just see how it falls. We're definitely going to have some pitchers on the board for all those picks.
Well, you just heard Mike Elias talk about the possibility that the Orioles would take a pitcher with the number 5 overall pick. And now we've seen 2 pitchers in the top 3 picks of the draft go as the Detroit Tigers make their selection at number 3 overall. And it is high school pitcher Jackson Jobe. So, Steve, let's talk about the possibility that the Orioles might also go with a pitcher now that we have seen 2 pitchers off the board, and the second of which was not Kumar Rocker. Do you think that alters their draft strategy at all and makes it any more likely that they will take an arm instead of a bat?
Probably not, but I think all along they thought Rocker would be there at 5. I mean, a lot of mocks have been falling to 7 or 8. It would be kind of a stunning fall when you think about it. I mean, in 2019, this kid was the freshman of the year, was the most outstanding pitcher in the College World Series. He looked like a future 1-1. They were calling him that then. And so I guess his velocity has fallen off. There's been some inconsistencies. He still had a big year statistically, Paul. So I think he's going to be out there. I mean, there's only one more pick for the Orioles. They were linked in the last hour leading up to the draft repeatedly to Khalil Watson, the high school shortstop from North Carolina. The final mocks for both MLB Pipeline and Baseball America had him taking Khalil Watson, one of the 4 high school shortstops. So it looks like when they pick, There will be high school shortstops left. Kumar Rocker still could be out there. The catcher's gone. The high school pitcher, Job, is gone, as we're 3 picks into this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's actually throw it back to Brendan Mortensen at the draft big board to discuss some of the options for the Orioles with that number 5 overall pick, because Brendan, things have not gone according to plan, at least from our perspective. I think a lot of us expected some different players off the board in those top 3 picks.
Yeah, going into this draft, I think if anybody told you that Marcelo Mayer would still be available with the number 4 overall pick, they would have told you were crazy, because most people thought he was going number 1 overall, and if he fell past that pick, he might go to number 3 for the Detroit Tigers. But I think the Tigers just stuck to their original draft plan, which was going with the high school pitcher Jackson Jobe. So now the Orioles are left with still 3 top shortstops that are available in Marcelo Mayer, Jordan Lawler, and Khalil Watson. I think any one of them would be a great pick at number 5.
Yeah, and of course that Jackson Jobe pick as a high school pitcher, probably going to be somebody who was signed under slot with the Detroit Tigers. And last year we know that part of the reason the Orioles made that selection with the number 2 overall pick of Heston Kjerstad was because he was able to be signed under the slot value of the number 2 overall pick. Of course, that means that allowed them to spread that money over their final 5 selections in the MLB draft. So it's not like they just put that money right back in their pocket. But what is the possibility that they could go to that strategy again and try to draft somebody and sign him to an under-slot deal? Mike Elias talked about that with the media a couple days ago.
I think a big part of gleaning the most value from the draft and the draft pool system and the way it works now, it's been like this since 2012. You have a finite amount of money that your team is allowed to spend in the draft. It's not like you put the money back in your pocket if you don't give it all to your first pick. You give it to later picks, or you can underpay later picks and overpay a higher pick. So you're just trying to get the most value out of your entire draft class as possible. I think a big part of being successful at that is being a little cagey about what our strategy is exactly in public, and keeping the agents and the industry on their toes. And we have demonstrated a history here and in Houston with, at times, pursuing that strategy, at times not. And I'm certainly not gonna, I don't know what we're gonna do right now, but even if I did, wouldn't be something we talk about. But obviously it's something that we do when we feel that it makes sense for the pick, and that may or may not be the case this year.
Well, if the Orioles do go with an underslot pick or not, this is how much money they have at their disposal for all of the picks they will make in this 20-round draft. $11,829,300. That is the 5th largest bonus pool of every team in the entire draft. So the benefit of having that number 5 overall pick isn't just the ability to get the guy that you want with that number 5 pick. It also gives you more money to spend on some of these players. So Brendan, let's talk again about the possibility that the Orioles could go under slot. And it is a strategy that Mike Elias has employed not just in his time with the Baltimore Orioles, but going back to his days with the Houston Astros. And for fans who aren't quite familiar with it, let's talk about what it means for the Orioles if they go with a guy who is underslotted at number 5.
Yeah, Paul, like you said before, there's a little bit of a misconception with underslotting. It's not like the Orioles are just going to pocket the money that they save by, say, selecting the number 10 prospect in the draft versus the number 4 prospect. They're just going to use that money later on in the draft to perhaps overslot for a player that could have gone earlier. For example, last year, the Orioles drafted Heston Kjerstad 2nd overall, while he was projected to go maybe number 7 or number 8. But later on in that 2020 draft, they were able to draft Coby Mayo. And Mayo has quickly moved up the Orioles prospect rankings. He's all the way up to number 14, just 1 spot behind Hudson Haskin in the Orioles' top 30 prospects. So they wouldn't have been able to get a prospect of Mayo's caliber if they hadn't gone underslot at number 2 with Heston Kjerstad.
And Boston has made their selection at number 4 overall, as you can see on Brendan's Royal Farms big board. They've gone with the guy that a lot of people thought might go number 1 overall to the Pittsburgh Pirates, but Boston snaps him up at number 4.
Yeah, I think this was just a case of best player available. I doubt the Boston Red Sox thought that Marcelo Mayer was going to be available at this spot. They were probably thinking either Jack Leiter or Henry Davis. Those two go number 1 and number 2 overall, and Mayer's slide ends at number 4.
Now, the Orioles are on the clock at the number 5 overall pick. There are plenty of options left for them. And Brendan, if they do go with an underslot pick, who are some of the names very quickly that they could go with?
Well, there's 2 outfielders that the Orioles have been connected with if they do decide to go underslot with the number 5 overall pick. First of which is Sam Houston State's Colton Cowser. He has a very high probability of making the major leagues, is how he's been described. He's got a good bat and he's solid defensively. Sal Frelick out of Boston College, sign up kind of a similar way. He's very speedy in center field. Most people think he is good enough defensively to stick there, and he has a solid enough bat where he should be able to move throughout the minor leagues pretty quickly. So if the Orioles do go underslot, I would anticipate that it's one of those 2 outfielders.
And Mike Elias talked about the 4 high school shortstops that could go in the top 4. He didn't name, or top 10 rather, he didn't name them, but we have an idea of who those 4 shortstops might be. Here's what Mike Elias had to say about the talent of those 4 high school shortstops near the top of the draft.
Yeah, there are 4 high school shortstops that we're still debating for the 5th pick. It's a talented group. There's pros and cons to all of them. There's risk rewards to all of them. But anytime you have 4 of them in the same draft class and they should all go in the top 10 picks, it's pretty rare. And then you got a couple of good pitchers as well, and some outfielders too. But I'd say the thing that looking back that defines this draft class is probably those 4 high school shortstops going in the top 10 picks or so.
Well, the pick is in for the Baltimore Orioles with the number 5 overall selection in the 2021 MLB Draft. Brendan, before we hear that name by the commissioner, do you have a prediction, an idea of who you think might go here?
Well, I think there's really 2 possibilities here for the Baltimore Orioles, and 2 names that we've heard a lot coming into the draft. First of which is shortstop Khalil Watson out of North Carolina, and the second is Colton Cowser. If Mike Elias decides to go underslot once again with the number 5 overall pick, I think those 2 are probably the most probable choices for the Orioles at number 5.
And there are, of course, plenty of options left for them on the table. We'll have to see who the Orioles pick as the pick is in, and we are just waiting to hear from Rob Manfred. Apparently the Oriole Bird is at the MLB Draft himself. J.J. Hardy, I believe, is the representative for the Baltimore Orioles at this draft, as Mike Elias is set to take the 3rd first-round pick of his tenure in Baltimore. In 2019, it was catcher Adley Rutschman out of Oregon State. Last year, with the number 2 overall pick, it was Heston Kjerstad, an outfielder from Arkansas, and now we are just waiting to hear who the Orioles will take with that number 5 overall pick. And we're also interested to hear what you have to say as we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Who do you want to see go off the board with the number 5 overall pick? And Brendan, we've heard a lot about Orioles fans wanting to take a pitcher here, and it sounds like they are interested in going with Kumar Rocker from what we've heard. Of course, he is still on the board there at number 5. 2 pitchers going up in that top 4, but Orioles fans gravitating to at least the most famous name in this draft.
Well, leading up to the draft, Mike Elias made it very clear that if he was going to draft a pitcher at number 5 overall, it pretty much had to be the perfect guy. And I think if Jack Leiter were available at that spot, the Orioles probably would have gone with him. I don't know if Kumar Rocker checks every box that the Orioles need him to for that 5th overall selection.
Rob Manfred is at the podium and making the selection for the Baltimore Orioles with the number 5 overall pick. And it is Colton Cowser, the outfielder from Sam Houston State. So a year after Mike Elias and company make a pick of an outfielder from the SEC, they go with another left-handed hitting, power hitting outfielder in the selection of Colton Cowser from Sam Houston State. And let's get Steve's reaction on this first, because Steve, last year a lot of us had not heard the name Heston Kjerstad when he was picked. Now we know the name Colton Cowser. We'd heard it by a lot of mock drafts and pundits leading up to this draft, but he ends up being the one selected by the Orioles with that number 5 pick.
He does, Paul, and it looks like it, that potentially sets him up to do the underslot deal again and then spend that money on someone else later in the draft. I mean, this was a second-year sophomore kid, 21 years old, lefty hitter. This year he had 374. 490 on base, 680 slugging, 16 homers, 52 RBIs. I mean, scouts like his tools across the board. 60 hit tool, a little bit more than 50 on the power, good arm. They say right now he's more a hitter than slugger, but they think he can work his way into some more pop, a career 354 hitter. And he was the number 11 player on the board for Baseball America in their top 500.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us here on the Draft Show. We'll let you go and hop off, talk to Mike Elias, who we will have later on in the show, but we appreciate your insight.
You got it, guys. See ya.
So a 6'3", 195-pound outfielder from Sam Houston State, Colton Cowser, the 21-year-old, is the selection by the Baltimore Orioles with the number 5 overall pick. Brendan, you just heard Steve talk a little bit about the fact that the Orioles could be going with a similar strategy of underslotting with this number 5 overall pick. Does that seem to be what you have gleaned from this pick as well?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a Heston Kjerstad situation from last year, where Colton Cowser is probably the number 10, number 11 prospect according to most people, but he's still going to be an impact player, hopefully, at the major league level. Mike Elias said that if he does not pick an impact player with the number 5 overall pick, he'll see it as a failure. So even though the Orioles are going underslot here at number 5, let's not make any mistake here. The Orioles are still drafting a very good player in Colton Cowser with the number 5 overall pick. His head coach likened him to Christian Yelich. So if the Orioles get a Christian Yelich-esque player with the number 5 overall pick, I think they'll take that any day of the week. And like I said before, Mike Elias said that he wanted an impact player with the number 5 overall pick. Over his first 2 drafts, it's a little too early to evaluate just how good those picks have been, but I took a look at the 2019 and 2020 draft classes and how they've been performing in the minor leagues. In just 2 years, Mike Elias has drafted 4 of the Orioles' top 6 prospects. The biggest name on that list, of course, is 2019 first overall pick Adley Rutschman. The 23-year-old catcher has lived up to the hype and then some, catching an elite young pitching staff and mashing in Double-A Bowie, hitting for average and power and walking more than he struck out.
We want to obviously give ourselves the best chance to hit and do damage, and controlling the strike zone is a big part of that.
But the 2019 draft class isn't all about Adley. Despite some early struggles in High A Aberdeen, 42nd overall pick Gunnar Henderson has shot up prospect rankings. In Delmarva, the recently turned 20-year-old hit .312 with 8 home runs to the opposite field. 108th pick Joey Ortiz got promoted to Double-A Bowie and had an immediate impact.
Joey Ortiz comes up for Sunday's doubleheader, and he reaches base all 4 times in his first game with the Bay Sox.
198th pick Johnny Reiser has impressed at the plate as well, earning a promotion to Double-A Bowie after just 15 games in Aberdeen. And how about 618th overall pick Toby Welk, an OPS over 900 with 3 home runs in his first 12 games in Double-A. Elias appears to have found some good value in the later rounds with Ortiz, Reiser, and Welk. The 2020 draft unfortunately didn't have any of those later rounds, nor did its draft class get a 2020 minor league season. So we haven't seen the O's most recent draft class play much baseball. In fact, we haven't seen number 2 overall pick Heston Kjerstad play any baseball at all. The outfielder has been dealing with complications with myocarditis, a heart condition that has kept him off the field.
That is slowing down our plan for his return to play. He's putting a lot of work in. He's very determined, but this is a bump in the road.
But early picks Jordan Westburg and Hudson Haskin have impressed in their brief showcases. Westburg was playing with his hair on fire in Delmarva, hitting .366 with an OPS well over 1. And in High A, the 30th overall pick is adjusting well, with an OPS close to .850. 39th pick Hudson Haskin has been showing off his speed in Low A, stealing 13 bases in his first 46 games. And J.D. Mundy went undrafted, but has quickly turned into one of the best power hitters in the O's system.
Mundy leads all Oriole minor leaguers in OPS, by the way, 1.039, and homers, and second in RBIs.
Mike Elias has a chance to add even more top prospects to a farm system that already ranks as one of the best in baseball. And the 2019 and 2020 draft classes have gone a long way in bolstering its reputation. Well, we got to see 2019 number 1 overall pick Adley Rutschman today at the Futures game. Got 2 at-bats batting cleanup for the American League team. Went 0 for 1 with a walk, but most notably about Rutschman, apparently hit a 468-foot home run in batting practice. Yes, it's Coors Field, but that's still awesome for number 1 overall pick Adley Rutschman. And then Marco Steplan did not fare as well, pitched just 1/3 of an inning, struck out the first batter he faced, but then allowed 2 solo home runs. But to be fair, that's against a stacked National League Futures game lineup.
Absolutely. So, Brendan, thank you so much for taking us back through those previous picks by Mike Elias and company. And obviously, Heston Kjerstad not named there as he's been dealing with health issues, trying to come back after he was taken with that number 2 overall pick. Colton Cowser, taken from Sam Houston State, the outfielder by the Baltimore Orioles, seems to be in a similar mold, an underslot style pick. We obviously don't know how much he will sign for. The assumption, though, is with a top 5 pick, he is likely to sign with the team that he is with. However, Brad Ciolek, who heads up the draft for the Baltimore Orioles, spoke with the media earlier this week, talked about the possibility of somebody getting away, somebody that could be drafted by the Orioles, not signing with the team, and how much that factors into their decision-making.
It's always an important factor, Paul. I would say that it's kind of a secondary factor. The first thing that we want to get right is we want to make sure we're going to impact player, especially when it's the top 5 pick in the country. But signability does come into play, especially with the high school guys more often than not. And typically, if there are some college athletes that are sophomore eligible and might have an extra year, we do weigh that into that process as well. But I would say it's probably secondary in terms of the things that we're looking at, but it does play a factor.
And you heard us mention it earlier in the show when I was talking to Steve Molesky, but undrafted free agency was a large part of the 2020 draft class, with the draft being only 5 rounds. Now we have a 20-round draft, so there is probably going to be more talent that is taken in the draft and less that is available after the draft ends for undrafted free agency, but it is still likely to be a part of Mike Elias and company's draft strategy. And of course, when this thing is done on Tuesday night, they will probably take to the phones and start calling some prospects who were not drafted to start talking about whether they could join the Orioles and the opportunity that they might have, even though their names weren't called during the draft. Mike Elias spoke to the media the other day about how he goes about making those calls and how he evaluates the talent that is left on the board after all 20 rounds are complete.
We have a great scouting staff and also a group of analysts in the front office that are targeting, identifying these guys. It feels a little different this year when it comes to the post-draft undrafted free agents. This is a new thing starting in 2020. You're capped at $20,000 to sign these guys. What's different this year is there's 20 rounds, so all these kids are hoping to be drafted as of today, so to call them and just talk about being a post-draft signing, it's not something we do anyway, but all these kids are deserving of and hoping to be going in the draft. So I think as soon as the draft ends, as soon as day 3 ends, that's when we'll start our process and make them aware of the opportunity that's here with our player development and our desire to raise players internally and allow them opportunities to make it to the big league level as homegrown players. So we'll be able to sell them on that opportunity, but we're going to wait until after the draft comes. And probably a lot of them are going to come from players that we had on our draft board that just didn't get selected.
Again, if you're just joining us, the Orioles selection with the number 5 overall pick in the 2021 MLB Draft is Colton Cowser, left-handed hitting outfielder from Sam Houston State. Excellent power hitter, an all-around good hitter. Jay Sirianni, his head coach of the Sam Houston State Bearcats, actually joined us on the MASN All Access podcast to discuss the kind of player Colton Cowser is. Now that he has been selected by the Orioles, what kind of player they will be getting. And now we're joined on the MASN All Access podcast by Jay Sirianni, who is the head coach for Sam Houston State. That would be the team of Colton Cowser, potential future first-round pick in the MLB Draft. Coach, thanks so much for hopping on with us.
Thanks, Paul. Glad to be here.
So let's start with, I was looking through the statistics for your season last year. This is your second season as head coach with Sam Houston State, though you've been with the team for longer than that. So you've gotten to know Colton for a little bit longer. And just looking through the statistics, I mean, Colton Cowser's name is all over your team leaderboards. How important was he to your offense last year in his junior year, where he was just leading the team in average on-base percentage, tied for the team lead in homers? What did he mean to your lineup?
Well, you know, he was really big. He was maybe the biggest piece we've had, and really in the conference, a lot of people didn't even want to pitch to him. So huge piece for us, and really he did everything for us to kind of help us overachieve, and he was a great leader on and off the field. So he was a big piece of this program for sure.
Coach, in his 55 games, you mentioned it a little bit that pitchers didn't even want to pitch to him. He had 42 walks and just 32 strikeouts. How much of that was just really good plate discipline, and how much of it was just pitchers not wanting to throw him strikes?
Well, it definitely starts with strike zone discipline. I mean, he understands, one, what he can hit well and hit hard, and two, he's not going to chase a whole lot. And then the other thing, I don't know the number of intentional walks, but there were a lot of times where he never even put a foot in the box. He just kind of kept going straight to first. So, but he definitely has a real good feel for the strike zone, and then to add to it the pitches that he can do damage to.
Yeah, and not just at the plate, but on the base paths as well. He had 17 stolen bases. That led the team. You expect some speed, of course, when you have a center fielder, but was he a true threat on the base paths for you when he was out there trying to steal bags?
Well, I think the first thing is he gets really, really good jumps. He understands, you know, how pitching is going to try to get the guy out behind him, but so he's a good base runner. He's also a really good runner. So, the combination of it, he basically had the green light all year. And when we did give him the red light, he wanted the green light. So very aggressive, good base runner, and then plus he can run.
All right, so Coach, the scouting report will tell you that he doesn't have a ton of loft to his swing, but he had a stretch of 5 straight games in April with a home run. Do you think his power will translate at the next level, or is he more of a gap-to-gap hitter?
Well, yeah, that's always the $1 million question. I think guys a lot smarter than me will figure that out. But I know his bat to ball skills are really good. It's flat. He does understand how to lift the ball. I think he's a hitter first at the end of the day, and the power's definitely going to come. I mean, he's a big kid. He's a big, strong kid, but he does know how to hit, and I think that's the first thing. He doesn't get real tied up into trying to hit jacks, and he likes them. Don't kid yourself, but he's a hitter first.
Yeah, that 370 plus batting average is a good indication of a guy who's just making good contact with the ball. And defense-wise, mentioned that he plays center field, of course. Was he a reliable center fielder for you guys, and do you think that that's something that he can play at the next level, or would you expect him maybe to shift over to a corner spot?
Well, I mean, from my standpoint, he can play center field. It all starts with kind of the first thing is the way he works day in and day out at his craft defensively. I mean, he takes BP really serious and gets after it out there, and his jumps are good. He takes really good angles and routes, and I don't want to be the guy that says he can't play center field. I just believe in my heart that he can, and somebody else is going to have to tell him he can't. I'll let somebody else deal with that.
So we've talked about all of his skills, all the things that he can do really well. Is there a professional player that you would compare his game to, or maybe compare what he could be in the future?
Well, I've had that question asked a bunch, and I guess, I don't want to, undersell him or whatever you want to call it, but I would say Yelich. That's the comp kind of body wise. He has no torso, but he can really, really run, and it's flat, a lot like Yelich was when he first got to the big leagues. And I would say that's the best comp that I can give him.
That would be a great outcome if that ends up being the outcome. But of course, just looking at him, of course, being a first round pick, that would be a great start as well. But watching his tape, he even kind of looks like Christian Yelich at the plate, at least from our end as well. And then, I mentioned off the top that you've been in that Sam Houston State program for several years now. You were the pitching coach before you were the head coach. So you've gotten to know Colton inside the clubhouse as well as on the field. What kind of person is Colton Cowser, and do you think that he could be a leader for a pro ball club?
Well, I think you start off with his makeup, number one. I mean, he graduated in 3 years. He has over a 3.8 cumulative GPA in construction management. I don't know if the kid's ever had a bad day. There's times where you're kind of like, hey, Colton, let's take this a little more serious. And he just doesn't. He's fun loving. The guys like him. You know, he's not, we call it not too cool for school. He'll do anything. And he, like I said, he's never had a bad day. Loves to work. His teammates like being around him, and really, you know, they like to give him a bunch of grief, and that's always good when your best player can take the grief as much as give it out. So, yeah, I don't have anything bad to say about the kid. He comes to the house, he plays with my kids. He's just a good all around kid.
That's awesome to hear. And if whatever team that ends up taking him, I'm sure he will be picked in the first round or first couple rounds, will be getting a solid kid as well as a good player as well. But Jay, thanks so much for hopping on here. We really appreciate it. Do you have draft plans? Do you have any plans in relation to Colton for what you're doing on the night of the first round of the MLB draft?
Well, yes and no. You know, it's always recruiting season and that kind of thing. We'll probably be down close to his hometown and probably swing by for sure. Got a meeting later with our sports information people about how we're going to do this. So it's going to be a special night for the Cowser family, number one, and that's what it's about. It's about the kids and the parents, and you know, we're just excited for him and to be a part of it. So we can't thank Colton and his family enough on our end, and fired up for him.
Absolutely. Could be a part of history as the highest drafted member of the Sam Houston State Bearcats, but even if he's not, could be a special night as well if he goes in that first round. So, Coach, thanks so much for hopping on. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, guys. Have a great day.
Some great insight from Sam Houston State head coach Jay Sirianni, who appeared on the MASN All Access podcast a couple of weeks ago. Podcast that you can catch on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Watch it on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Subtle plug for the MASN All Access podcast. Again, the pick with the number 5 overall selection by the Baltimore Orioles in the 2021 MLB Draft is Sam Houston State outfielder Colton Cowser. Brendan, we've seen a couple more guys now go off the board as they are up to 8 in the 2021 MLB Draft. And some surprising picks, especially with that number 7 overall pick and the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah, at number 6, the Arizona Diamondbacks go with Jordan Lawler, who was a top 3 prospect in this draft. Some even had him as the number 1 overall prospect in this draft. But like you said, Paul, at number 7, the Royals go with left-handed high school pitcher Frank Mazzucato. And if you don't see him on this big board, there's a reason, because according to MLB Pipeline's rankings, he was the 39th ranked overall prospect. Now, it's nothing against Mazzucato. He did throw 4 straight no-hitters in his last 4 high school games to lead his team to the playoffs, but he's a bit of a project out of Connecticut. Nobody really knows what they're getting out of Frank Mazzucato, so if you think the Orioles went under slot with Colton Cowser at number 5, maybe Cowser was around the 10th or 11th ranked prospect, Mazzucato all the way down at number 39. And then Jordan Lawler at number 6 overall is a bit of an interesting case. He's a fantastic shortstop prospect. However, he also had a pretty strong commitment to Vanderbilt. Probably not so strong that he's going to end up playing for the Commodores, but maybe strong enough where it would have taken a little bit of extra money to sign him with that number 6 overall pick. The Orioles probably not willing to do that with number 5. The Diamondbacks willing to do so with number 6.
And that number 6 pick being Jordan Lawler, a pick that a lot of Orioles fans might have thought the Orioles might go with, but you mentioned that, the fact that he probably would have cost a little bit more than Colton Cowser would with that 6 if he was taken with the number 5 overall pick. And Brendan, Kumar Rocker still on the board. Of course, I'm sure Kansas City Royals fans are probably pulling their hair out that he wasn't the pick at number 7 and that they went with a high school pitcher that most average draft fans have not heard of, but still out there and probably the best talent left for any team to select in this MLB draft.
Yeah, two names that a lot of people didn't think would still be here at this point. Kumar Rocker and then Khalil Watson, the high school shortstop out of North Carolina, has still yet to be selected. But in the case of Lawler and Rocker, I think both the Orioles and Royals going underslot probably just didn't want to back themselves into a corner. If you're drafting one of those top prospects, you're probably going to have to sign them for quite a bit of money at the number 5 and number 7 overall picks, respectively. And that really limits what you can do with your later round picks. If you have to sign somebody for X amount of dollars with that number 5 or number 7 pick, you probably won't be able to get fantastic prospects later on in the draft. And the Orioles, if you look at their second picks in the last two drafts, Jordan Westburg and Gunnar Henderson, they have both been fantastic for the Orioles so far. So maybe Baltimore just wants to be able to give themselves a little bit more flexibility to draft a player of Westburg or Henderson's caliber later on in the draft.
Yeah, a couple of those high school shortstops still on the board there is Khalil Watson, still yet to be taken in this 2021 MLB Draft. There's also Boston College outfielder Sal Frelick, who could be taken at some point over the next couple picks, and Brady House, the other high school shortstop, who might move to third base long term. Still out there. Some considered a top 5 talent in this draft, but he is still available. The Orioles, with that number 5 overall pick, going with Sam Houston State outfielder Colton Cowser. Let's take a look again at his stats for the 2021 season, and they were pretty eye-popping. In 55 games with the Bearcats, he hit .374 with 16 home runs and OPS over 1.1, and he also has speed on the base paths as well with 17 stolen bases. And when we were doing our draft prep on Colton Cowser, Brendan, I like to compare him to both Hudson Haskin, the Orioles' second-round pick from 2020, in addition to Heston Kjerstad, their first-round pick in 2020, because he has the power, those 16 home runs that Heston Kjerstad brought to the table when he was with Arkansas, and the speed on the base paths that Hudson Haskin what made him a good player at Tulane and what made the Orioles want to snap him up in the second round last year. So kind of a best of both worlds, I guess you could say, a combination of both Kjerstad and Haskin.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of both in his game, and really the one thing that scouts looked at with Colton Cowser was how his power was going to translate to the next level. He really doesn't have any uppercut to his swing, which is a little unusual for a left-handed hitting outfielder. Now, I suppose if you're the Orioles, it's probably better to have not enough of an uppercut in your swing to too much. Maybe that's something that the Orioles feel like the coaches in the minor leagues can take a look at and try to unlock some of that power that might be there with Colton Cowser. He's not quite the power hitter that Heston Kjerstad was, but he's a similar hitter for average. And then you mentioned Hudson Haskin as well, an absolute menace on the base paths right now. And I think Colton Cowser has a chance to do the same thing. He could be a guy that could steal 20-plus bases a season while playing good defense in potentially center field if he's able to stick there. He certainly has the speed to if the Orioles want to keep him up the middle. And he can also hit for a pretty decent average. And most scouts project that he might be able to be a 20-plus home run guy, maybe not a 30 or 40, but if you can get 20-plus home runs and quality defense and speed on the base paths from your number 5 overall pick, you'll certainly take that at the major league level.
Absolutely, and Colorado Rockies were just on the board, made their pick at number 8, and they took Benny Montgomery, the speedy center fielder, high school center fielder, who played for Redland High School in Pennsylvania, a guy that you talked to before this draft, Brendan. You came away impressed with your interview with Benny Montgomery. Seemed like a guy who understood the game on a pretty high level and knew what he was bringing to the table as one of the fastest guys in this draft.
Yeah, that's what was so exciting about Benny Montgomery. His two tools that really jumped off the board were his power and his speed. And I think if you're drafting somebody within the top 10, those are two tools that maybe you would value a little bit higher than others. He's drawn comparisons to guys like Cody Bellinger and Jason Worth because he's got a big power bat in the outfield, and he's also fast and a little bit oversized. He stands at 6'4" and is still able to play center field. Some scouts have given him the maximum grade of 80 on his running tool, so scouts think that he'll be able to stick in center field as well as being a power bat, which would be a fantastic addition to this Colorado Rockies team at number 8.
So as Benny Montgomery goes off the board, a lot of talent still out there for teams who are picking in the teens in this MLB draft. Of course, again, the number 5 overall pick by the Baltimore Orioles being Sam Houston State outfielder Colton Cowser. Power bat, who also has some speed and an all-around good hitter from the left side of the plate. We will be back in a few minutes as we are going to be joined by Executive Vice President and General Manager Mike Elias to discuss the pick of Colton Cowser at number 5 overall. What motivated Mike Elias to hand in the draft card for Cowser, and what separated Cowser from the pack with that number 5 overall pick? So we will be back on the other side, our interview live, as Mike Elias joins MASN All Access. We're back live on MASN All Access from the warehouse at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, breaking down the Orioles selection at number 5 overall, Sam Houston State outfielder Colton Cowser. And we're joined by Mike Elias, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Baltimore Orioles. Mike, thanks so much for hopping on. Busy night. Thanks for squeezing us in.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for having me.
So Colton Cowser at the number 5 overall pick. What separated Cowser from the bunch, and why was he the best talent on the board available for you?
Well, Paul, this guy rakes. He's probably the best pure hitter in this draft class. At least that's the way we look at it. And on top of that, he has all 5 tools. He throws, he runs, he plays defense, he hits for power, he hits for average. That's what you strive for with the first round pick, and then to get that in a elite college performer, and sort of the probability that provides when somebody's had a dominant college career like he has to go with those physical tools. We couldn't pass it up.
And obviously, Heston Kjerstad last year was a power-hitting outfielder who played in the SEC and put up outstanding numbers there. Sam Houston State, not the same level of competition. Were there any level of competition concerns as you looked at Colton Cowser this year?
Well, you always take that into account, and we have very sophisticated ways of adjusting for that with our college statistics modeling, and we know to take into account a player's strength of schedule. But I think with him, aside from that, this is a player that was on Team USA, hit well for Team USA with Wood. That's always a reassuring thing to see. And with what the pandemic did to summer college baseball last year, frankly, it was very rare to have a player. They didn't have a Team USA season last year, so he was on it as a freshman in 2019. So he's one of the only college players in this draft class to have that going for him. So we feel really good about the bat history that he's laid down. But ultimately, it's your evaluation of his physical tools and his swing and his makeup and all of that drives the bus. So to really have all those boxes checked for us, it gave us the comfort that we needed to take a player this high.
And Colton Cowser played center field for the most part at Sam Houston State, but there's also been some thought from some draft pundits that he might move to a corner outfield long term. Do you feel like at this time that he can play center field in the big leagues for a long time?
Yeah, we do project him as somebody that can play center field in the big leagues, and that's really important. But one of the beauties of being a middle of the diamond defender like he is roster construction at the major league level will give him the ability to move around to all 3 outfield spots, and he has enough arm to play right field. He's got an above average arm, very accurate. So if he's playing alongside a Cedric Mullins or another capable center fielder with that, he's got a lot of flexibility, and his bat will profile at any spot in the outfield. So I think that this maximizes his chances of fitting in on this team, and he's going to be an impact offensive player and an impact defensive player.
Sam Houston State head coach Jay Sirianni talked about the fact that Colton Cowser has a good sense of humor, can laugh at himself, but he's also a leader in the clubhouse as well. Is that something that your scouts uncovered about Colton Cowser? What kind of makeup did he have?
Yeah, definitely. It's so important. And we brought him here to Camden Yards prior to the draft for a workout and to get to know him. And his work ethic is clear. He's got a very easygoing, outgoing personality, and he's very smart. And we think he's going to fit in great with our player development program and with the culture that we're building in the minor leagues and throughout the organization. I think he's going to be a huge part of making everyone around him better as well.
A couple days ago, you talked about not forcing pitching if the draft didn't give it to you. Was that the situation here with that number 5 overall pick, where you didn't want to fit a square peg into a round hole if the talent was not there?
Well, we have pitchers in this draft that we like, and you only get to take one player away from the first round of the draft every year. And if we could take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 players from this draft, we would. But we had to pick one. We went with the player that was our favorite player on the board, and trying to get this pick as right as possible was the most important thing. And we have to take the best player on our board rather than draft for perceived needs or to reach for certain positions. So That's the best way to approach the baseball draft. I think that's what every organization and every general manager in baseball will tell you, and that's exactly what we did here.
And last year, obviously, Heston Kjerstad, somebody who signed under slot, obviously still ways away from any of these picks signing, but how much was under slot, or how much the number that Colton Cowser is potentially and his agent are looking for, how much was that a factor in the selection of Cowser at number 5?
Yeah, I think we'll see where we land when we sign him, but you do the best to maximize talent out of your draft classes. The way that baseball is set up right now, each team has a finite amount in their draft pool that they're allowed to spend, and you have the ability to spread some of that out amongst other players, and we've done so to great success here recently. So if we're able to have the opportunity to maybe use some money later in the draft to sign some high school players who fell a little bit further than their talent warrants, we're going to be aggressive about doing that.
Mike, I don't want to keep you under the lights for too long. How long will you get to celebrate the selection of Colton Cowser, number 5, tonight before you turn the page and start looking at rounds 2 through 10 tomorrow afternoon?
Yeah, we don't get to celebrate much at all. It's going to be a long night and early morning. Really, the big bulk of the draft is tomorrow. It's rounds 2 through 10, and that is enormous. And it's just as important as your first round pick. So we're going to be cranking away all night at that, and we don't have much rest on the horizon, but that's the way we like it.
Well, we appreciate you fitting us into your busy schedule for tonight. Thanks so much for hopping on. Executive Vice President and GM of the Baltimore Orioles, Mike Elias. Thanks again.
Thank you.
That just about does it for our show, MASN All Access from the warehouse. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your time. And of course, tune in tomorrow live for the MASN All Access podcast as myself and Brendan Mortensen will recap the draft in the selection of number 5 overall pick, Colton Cowser. Thanks so much to Bobby Blanco, Amy Jennings, and Brendan Mortensen behind the scenes tonight. Thanks to you for tuning in, and tune in for all of our coverage on MASNsports.com and all of our social feeds as we take you through rounds 2 through 10 tomorrow, and then the draft concludes with rounds 11 through 20 on Tuesday afternoon. And of course, the Home Run Derby. Can't forget about Trey Mancini tomorrow night before Cedric Mullins. We'll see him in Colorado for the All-Star game on Tuesday night. So full coverage of an exciting week for the Orioles. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Paul Mancano, and we will see you next time.